Hello and welcome back once more to 5-Minute Theology, where I attempt to explain some concept of Christianity in 5 minutes or less. Today's topic or word is one that you can't escape if you spend any length of time in modern Christian circles, and that's worship. We talk about ourselves as worshippers of God. We talk about what we do when we meet as the worship. We talk about singing as worship and music leaders as worship leaders. What is worship, and what does it mean to truly worship God? I'm going to try and explain that in 5 minutes or less, starting as soon as I can get this timer started. And let's go. So, what is worship? Well, worship is a word laced all through the Bible, in the Old and New Testaments. Our English word worship actually comes from worthship or worthiness. So worship is giving somebody their worth, giving them what they deserve, usually giving them respect and admiration if that's what they deserve. But the words we use it to translate in Greek and in Hebrew have a slightly different sense. The Greek proskuneo literally means to come near to kiss, and it's to come near to kiss the feet of a king or a sovereign. This was how you showed homage, showed obedience, showed that you accepted somebody as your king and ruler in the ancient world. So when the Bible talks about worship, it's usually using it in this sense, or this rooted in this context, recognizing the kingship of God, recognizing his authority, his greatness, and the fact that he is our king and has authority over us. One of the ways we use worship quite often these days is to describe what we do when we sing. And actually worship is a much bigger concept. For that matter, music, singing is much bigger than simply worship. When we worship God, we do that in many ways. We do it by showing obedience to him. That's how we show that we accept him as our king. We show worship to God when we bear witness to him in the world, when we tell others about him. There we're publicizing his kingship. We worship God when we live different lives in the world, when we live in holiness, avoiding sin and doing good, because that too shows that we're accepting God's authority, we're accepting him as a Lord. Paul in Romans says, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, this is your spiritual act of worship. In other words, the way you worship God is about how you live day by day in your physical life, what you set down, the sins that you no longer pursue, and what you take up, the good you do. The way in which you put God's commands before your preferences, you put the needs of others before your own, minute by minute and day by day. All of this is worship. And music, too, can involve things other than worship. It can involve lament, as many of the Psalms do. Petition, asking God for stuff, celebrating good things that have happened. Music in church is much bigger than just worship, and worship is much bigger than music. But the two do overlap in praise. The two overlap when we sing songs about God's greatness and God's goodness, songs that express our obedience to him and our acceptance of him as Lord. And that can be one of the most powerful and moving ways for us to worship God. And that's how music can facilitate worship. There's something else to be said about worship, though. Why does the universe exist? Jonathan Edwards, the reformer, wrote a book called God's Passion for His Glory, subtitled The End to Which God Created the World. And what he's saying is that the reason God made the world was to reveal his glory and to bless his creation. And those two are not two, but one. To do one is to do the other. In other words, God created the world so that his glory could be revealed, so that he could receive worship. And In worshipping God is where we as his creation are most blessed. All of creation is a living testament to God's goodness and greatness. And we are no exception to that. We exist ultimately to worship. The end of the Bible is a great multitude gathered around God, worshipping him, that is, recognizing him as king, praising him and accepting him as Lord. So everything we do that is worship of God is part of the purpose of the universe. Everything we do that acknowledges or displays or celebrates God's greatness and goodness is fulfilling the purpose of all creation. Whether that's taking a moment to be kind to somebody at work, taking a moment to be patient and not write an angry reply to an email, or just looking out at a beautiful morning and saying, "Thank you, God, you are good." Whatever of those we do, we worship God and so fulfill the purpose for which all things were made. And that's my time. I hope that was a helpful start to the idea of worship. Like all the topics we talk about here, there's a lot more that could be said. But there are some opening thoughts, and as ever, do feel free to discuss the matter in the comments as you see fit. And tune back in later for another 5-minute theology. God bless.